Hello everyone, welcome back to another Wizard101 video. I'd just like to take a second at the beginning of this video. I didn't want to make a full video on it because it felt very clickbaity and like kind of gross to do. But recently, I believe a month ago now, the voice actor of Merle Ambrose passed away, which is very unfortunate, very sad, but he lived a long life. And Merle Ambrose is one of the coolest and best NPCs in this game. Everyone knows him and loves him as a kid. I mean, obviously, he's probably one of the most iconic video game figures for a lot of us Wizard101 players as kids. And it's quite sad that he won't be able to record any more voice lines for Merle Ambrose, but we still have him memorialized in the game forever. I just wanted to real quickly talk about that and wish him well in whatever afterlife exists. And I hope all of you also take a moment to put him in your thoughts. I don't like thoughts and prayers. It's kind of an icky phrase, but yeah. It's a sad thing, and you know, everyone should know about it and take a moment to kind of just be like, damn, that sucks. Time sucks, man. But that was a downer way to start this video. Let me get into the actual video itself. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. I'm back for another video, and guess what? It's Halloween. It's Halloween in Wizard101. Halloween's my favorite holiday. It's just a good holiday, you know? Let me know what your favorite holiday is in the comments below. But I digress. Today is a day of discussing how good every Wizard101 school currently is in the year of our Lord 2024. Now you may ask where exactly this comes from. Basically, I was looking at my old videos. I tend to yearly make a ranking schools and ranking worlds video, but realistically, ranking the schools, my ranking doesn't really change that much from year to year. And on top of that, currently how Wizard101 is, no school is bad. None of the schools in this game are bad. So I was like, what's a different video I can do that still kind of talks about the current state of schools in Wizard101, but isn't exactly a ranking? So I was like, what about how good is each school in Wizard101? And that might not seem that different, but I want to discuss the strengths and weaknesses and whether the school in the current meta is a really powerful school or maybe not as powerful as the rest. None of them are weak, especially if you have good gear. None of them are weak, but I figured I could talk about the strengths and weaknesses. Another thing that kind of brought this video on is about 2 months ago now, I made a School Identity is Dead video, which, by the way, still agree with. It's still kind of in a bad state right now where there's no differences between the schools. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to make this, is because the schools, they still have an identity. It's just not nearly as prevalent as it used to be, especially with how stats work nowadays. As I mentioned, every school is equally as viable. You can get through the game with any school, but I've strayed kind of far from the topic. Let's get into the video. How good is each Wizard101 school in 2024? Starting off, we have the School of Fire. Now, everyone knows kind of how fire is. Damage over times, it has high damage, it has low health. For the early game, it has low accuracy, and the main draw of fire is the fact that the damage over times do more damage overall for the cost per pip than a single target, just regular damage spell would do. So for example, a lot of Fire's damage over time spells will be stronger, say, than Storm's, but it'll do that damage over multiple rounds instead of at once. This kind of makes Fire into the DPS class of Wizard101. You're supposed to be doing damage over time, tick damage, and up until recently, that really wasn't the case. With Fire, up until I would say maybe 2022, 2023, it was basically better than Storm, because what Kaiser did was they made the fire gear have more damage than Storm's. So for a while, specifically in the early 2020s, fire had more damage than Storm, but without the same drawbacks. So it had 5% more accuracy, it had quite a bit more health, and it would still do more damage, right? Nowadays, Kaiser's kind of shifted a few spells around and kind of adjusted. I would say fire is okay, but damage over time in the current meta isn't the best unless you're really into that sort of thing. The reason why it's not as good as it used to be is because spells like Fire from Above have been changed. Most of the new spells that they've added have had some kind of effect, like this one, like Detonate after 4 rounds. Basically, most of the new spells that have been added haven't been flat damage spells, except for the new AoE, which everyone got one of. I would say Fire is not what it used to be, and I think I don't remember if that's exactly what I made a video on, but I made a video talking about fire a year or two ago, and I said something similar. Fire is going down a route where its main appeal is damage over time, and in the current meta, damage over time isn't really as applicable, which obviously anyone can play whatever they want. But if we're just talking about how good each class is, realistically, fire in terms of damage has kind of fallen off. I would say it's certainly not as good as even Storm or Death, and maybe even Myth. One thing I want to mention real quick, I just want to quickly throw this in. I also want to mention the benefits each school has from Arch Mastery. I would say Fire doesn't really get too many benefits for Arch Mastery compared to other schools. Other schools such as Ice can like tech into Life, or Storm can tech into like Death. But in the case of Fire, I mean, you can train other spells and use Arch Mastery to use those, but realistically, you're not going to get nearly as much out of it as most other schools would, in my opinion. So I would say Fire right now, especially towards the end of the game, is especially middle of the road, and it's kind of not mediocre, but it's definitely, compared to what it used to be, it's not nearly as good. Next up, we have Ice. Ice is a good school. For a very long time, it wasn't really the best, and by a very long time, I mean from the game's inception up until about 2014, Ice was a pretty trash school. The main draw of Ice is it's especially high health, it's high resistances, and obviously its spells have pretty decent accuracy, but I wouldn't say that's one of its main draws. Realistically, it is the shield school, it's defensive, you won't really die as an Ice, or at least not nearly as easily. Nowadays, however, Ice is exceptionally broken, because as an Ice, you can get a solid 70-80 resist, and still have high hundreds to maybe even early 200s damage, which means it is basically as good. Besides the base spell damage, it has the same stats as most other schools on top of resisting 80% of enemy damage, which is insane. Currently, Ice is in a place where I would say it's just an exceptional school. Like, there's no reason to not have a good Ice, besides the fact that you have to slog through the early game nowadays until you get to Arc 3. Ice can also benefit from Arch Mastery because it basically can turn into a Life Wizard. It can use life spells pretty easily with Arch Mastery, which is very nice. And overall, I would say Ice is actually one of the most solid schools in 2024. Like, I would put it up there with most of the best schools in the game. Next up is Storm. Now, I am a notorious Storm hater. If you've watched most of my past videos, I very much don't like Storm. But the reason why I don't like Storm isn't because it's bad. The reason why I don't like Storm is because it is too good, specifically in the current meta. For some reason, if you're not really into games, but you're into Wizard101, and you're curious to what I mean by meta, what I mean is usually in games, there is a most common kind of strategy. So in Wizard101, for example, the current meta for PvE is blading and using your AoE, attack all enemy spells, which is either 4 pip, 7 pip, or the new ones that are, I think, 3 pips and a school pip. Storm is exceptional in this game because it has a spell called Tempest, which you can just spam. It has one of the better damage per pips in this game, and realistically, you could use Tempest in every single fight after you get it and have no problems, except for maybe the occasional cheating boss that requires you to use a single target. Storm's drawbacks are that it has very low health. Even at max level nowadays, it still has a solid 5,000 or 6,000 health less than the top class. These spells have very low accuracy, so early game you are going to be fizzling constantly, and that's about it. I would say that Storm nowadays, obviously it's good. It is a good class. I just think it's exceptionally boring, which, I mean, it is. Don't get me wrong. I feel like flat out it is just boring, right? To say otherwise, it's like, I guess most other schools aren't that much more interesting in the current meta. I don't know. I digress. My point is, Storm is definitely one of the best schools to pick nowadays. It's not as good for soloing as some other schools, but it is exceptional in a team setting where other people can draw the aggro of enemies and you can just thrive doing massive amounts of damage. Storm is definitely towards the top, and compared to fire nowadays, definitely exceptional when it comes to hitting. Next up, we're going to talk about balance. And balance, I will say, is in an unfortunate place nowadays. They've been exceptionally good at blading others, buffing others, occasionally healing. Their draw isn't damage, but they can do quite a bit of damage if you have the right setup. And overall, again, they're the support class. They weren't supposed to be an exceptional standout. Now, the problem with balance nowadays is there really isn't nearly as much reason for them to exist. The reason why I say that is because the current meta, which I need to stop saying the current meta, I've said it approximately 6 times now this video. Currently, we feint, we do maybe 1 or 2 blades, and then we 7-pip AoE for a big boss, right? Now, what exactly can balance do here that a, say, life wizard or an ice wizard can't? They fall into that same support role, but balance doesn't really have nearly as much benefit as it used to, because those other classes might also have Spirit Blade, which, you know, if you're a balance, what are you going to do? Balance Blade that has like 10% less damage than all the rest of the blades. There's not really a point. On top of that, balance is pretty hard for most of the game. I mean, I wouldn't say late game, like Arc 3 and Arc 4, balance isn't nearly as hard, but the first 2 arcs, it's exceptionally hard for very little payoff. If you're making a support class wizard, it would definitely be better to just make an ice or make a life, than make a balance. So I would say nowadays, balance is pretty mediocre. Like, I would say in terms of schools, I wouldn't recommend making a balance, especially to new players. Like, there isn't as much of a point as life or ice, as I mentioned in the past. And if you're wanting to damage on a balance for some reason, it's not nearly as good at the role as storm, myth, death, or even fire, despite the fact that fire uses DOTs, which aren't nearly as effective. I don't have much to say more than that. It's a little sad because I do really like balance. I have a special place in my heart for it, especially since I did the Balance Let's Play series, which some of you might not even know that I had that. It's over 100 episodes long, and I have like 550 hours of the Steam version logged just from that playthrough, but it's just not as good, which, again, not as good doesn't mean bad. Every school is good in the current Wizard 101 meta. Next up is Life, and Life is very similar to Ice, except for the fact that Arch Mastery isn't necessarily as needed because you are already a Life. Life's benefits are the fact that it has really good health. It actually has the best health in the game. It has high resistance, second only to Ice. It does semi-decent damage, and obviously it can heal, and it doesn't need Arch Mastery to heal, which is really, really good. Beyond that, Life is just really solid. I don't know what else to say besides that. Even arcs 1, 2, 3, and 4, all 4 arcs, Life is a solid choice, which I think puts it actually pretty high on this list of how good each school is, because, say, Ice, for example, struggles in the first 2 arcs. Fire and Storm also struggle in those early arcs, by themselves especially. Balance doesn't really have an outstanding arc. It's okay for all 4 of them, I would say, but it kind of struggles in Arc 2. But Life doesn't really struggle with any arc, I would say. The only world I can think of that is the Life's bane would be like Avalon, because Avalon has a bunch of myth imps, right? What else can I say? I would give Life like a solid 9 out of 10 in the current meta, how everything works. It's good. The only weakness Life has, actually, let me correct that, is that it doesn't get a good early 4-pip AoE because you can't get Rat Spin unless you do King Boar or buy packs. It's a weakness for sure, but is it the end of the world? No. I think the only thing that does is it makes arcs 1 and 2 maybe slightly slower, but I don't think it's a big enough weakness to even knock any points off of Life. I think Life is just a good school. All right, next up is Myth, and if you know me, you know I have a very soft spot for Myth. It's one of my favorite schools. I think, in fact, in my last ranking video, my ranking schools in 2023, I put Myth right at the top, maybe second. It's because Myth is just really fun. Its main draw is the fact that it has minions and stuns. Unfortunately, both are completely useless. I would say that Myth's current kind of role is it's basically what Fire used to be. It has very solid damage. I would say it is the third best hitter in the game currently in terms of direct damage. Maybe Fire is still above it, but it's very close to Fire with Fire's DOTs. It has solid damage. It has all right accuracy early game. It has decent health. It's just a decent hitting school. Now, the problem with Myth, if you're wanting to play this school for its main draw, which is minions, henchmen, and stunning, yeah, you're not going to get that because almost every enemy in this game has stun immunity or stun resist, which is just makes stunning useless. And then minions aren't very good because you can't control them. Nowadays, minions are slightly better than they used to be because they used to just be the ones that you could train, which actually, can you even train any? You might just get them in school, but you basically can summon minions, right? Nowadays, if you really want to have a interesting playthrough, you could use Monstrology and create these summon treasure cards and summon things to fight for you, which I think is very interesting. I've seen almost no person do this because no one does Monstrology because it is a kind of boring addition to the game. I kind of highly doubt many of you have even tried it, let alone gotten it to a high level. But it's certainly interesting for Myth. I'd say Myth is just kind of decent nowadays. It's like a middle of the pack. It doesn't really have that many strengths, but it doesn't have that many weaknesses either. In terms of Arch Mastery, I don't think Myth really benefits from it more than any other school would. Now that we're getting towards the end here, the only schools that really benefit from Arch Mastery are Storm and Ice, really. The other schools obviously can train other spells, but Storm only really needs it because of the low accuracy spells, especially early game. And then Ice can use it to train heals. Balance could also use it to train heals. I just think it would be kind of pointless when you could just make an Ice, right? So either way, I think Myth is all right. All right, next up and finally on our list, saving the best for last, is Death. Now, Death has decent health, decent resist, good damage, and its main draw, it has heal back spells. So most of its spells, when you damage an enemy, you absorb 50% of that damage back to you, which makes Death, hands down, probably the best school in Wizard101, especially towards soloing. Fun fact, if you use a heal back spell and the enemy has an absorb, it goes through the absorb. Why? I don't know. It's just a hidden little thing about Death, which I think is very fun. Now, the negatives of Death, it doesn't get a 4-pip AoE. In fact, it doesn't really get an early game AoE. It has the option of Deer Knight and also the option of Ship of Fools. But Ship of Fools you can only really get from the Science Center with gold keys, and Deer Knight you can only get by either doing the Spellament boss or crafting it. And crafting it will take you until at least Avalon. So again, I've already alluded to it, but Death is definitely one of the best schools nowadays. I would say in terms of damage, it can get, I believe, the second or third highest damage in the game. Its spells base damage are really good as well. And I would just say in terms of a hitter, for the spiritual schools especially, it's the best hitter. It's right behind Storm, in my opinion. And it's definitely one of the best classes in the game, especially in 2024. Arch Mastery doesn't really affect it in any way because if you're a Death, why would you use other spells other than Death? Because Death spells are already probably the best in the game, or at least one of them. So Death definitely up there. Now for our final section, I've gone over each school. Let me kind of give a ranking. I know I said I wouldn't rank them, but I'm giving a general ranking on how decent they are. But I want you to keep in mind, again, while we're coming to the end, all of these schools completely viable in Wizard101 because they're all really good. It's just that some are quite a bit better than the other ones. Here we are. I would say Death is the undisputed #1. It's just overall the best. I would say next up is Ice, Life, and Storm, kind of tied for #2 because they're all really good. The only reason why they're kind of tied is because Ice and Life are very similar. They're basically the same school, except the fact that Ice gets shields earlier and Life gets the ability to heal earlier without Arch Mastery. And then Storm is obviously probably the best damaging school. So I would say it definitely just fits nice right in there, depending on whether you want to support or damage. Next up, I would say is Myth, which only slightly edges out Fire. It's slightly better, right? The reason why Myth is better is just because it doesn't have damage over times where Fire does. If the meta was different, like if 7-pip AoEs and blading didn't exist as they currently do, I would say that fire would be probably better. But as it stands, myth is better, at least slightly. And then finally and last would be balance, because balance, again, doesn't really have a point to it in terms of a support class. Early game, it can blade probably more than other people, which is decent, but I wouldn't say that that takes it anywhere further than, say, Ice or Life. Ice or Life are just flat out better. So I hope you all enjoyed that video. I know it's kind of out of nowhere. It's been a month since I've uploaded, but I figured I'd come back. I'd upload. Why not, right? If you agreed or disagreed, make sure to comment. But otherwise, make sure to drop a like, hit the subscribe button. I'm almost at 12,000, I believe, which is really good. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day. Adios.